My name is Peter Werbe. I was born on June 19th, 1940. That's 75 years after the end of the Civil War, which always floors me when I think about it. I was born in Detroit. I was raised in Detroit, raised hell in Detroit, and remain here. I was born in a middle class family and had a pretty uneventful childhood. Why am I saying that? I got kicked out of school, high school permanently. I flunked the eighth grade. So I never did real well with authority. I mean, I always warmed up to the phrase that you're born an anarchist and all the discipline and submission to authority is learned. So I would, well, we're all natural anarchists, but I never did relate well to rules and authority figures and what have you. So my life has been a little tempestuous, but being white and middle class, didn't have the disastrous effects that it has on poorer people or people of color. Parents were very close to the Communist Party, and so I was born into a liberal progressive household. And I say that because they never were members of the Communist Party, although they supported Henry Wallace, communist-backed candidate for president in 1944. But the rest of it, they would support the most liberal Democratic candidate. And so they're very supportive of the civil rights movement in the 1950s. And I lived mostly in Jewish communities, so that also had a very liberal strain to it. I really became, I guess you'd say, almost radicalized through the university that I went to, Michigan State University in East Lansing. And because like I say, I was always sort of mischief maker, troublemaker. My dad always had to be coming to school to bail me out, the cops, everything like that. And we had this course called American Thought and Language, which had readings of all things. So this would be like 1962, or maybe early 1961. That's important. 1961. So it had the readings of Jack London, Emma Goldman, and all sorts of Henry Thoreau, all sorts of other American dissidents and radicals. And I thought, oh, I'm not just weird. I don't have to go to these therapists that my parents tried to send me to so I would adjust better or get along in school. There really was an historic antecedent to rejection of authority and rebellion and what have you. At the same time, by the way, the conservatives, because this was just a little after the McCarthy period in 1961, and these conservatives in Lansing were saying Michigan State is teaching socialism and communism and anarchism. And of course, the school was saying, oh, this is going back to the McCarthy era. And I'm thinking, no, that's exactly what they were teaching, because that's what I learned. And that's what I made it my own. I came back to Detroit, took part in the civil rights movement, a group called the Northern Student Movement, which was sort of a reflection of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the South, and was involved early on in the anti-war movement. I was a member of Students for a Democratic Society. So there was a first big SDS march on Washington in 1965. I was part of that. And at the same time, I ran into somebody who was publishing a newspaper called the Fifth Estate, what was then called an underground paper, one of the eventually many papers that arose out of the New Left movement of the 1960s and 70s. The Fifth Estate was among the first five. By 1970, there were about 500 regularly appearing so-called underground papers with a weekly circulation of about 4 million. If you get, maybe by comparison, something like Fox News today, their big cheese, talking heads, they have like 1.5 million people. So this was, part of the propaganda in the best sense, propagating ideas that I've been involved with ever since, including the Fifth Estate, which still publishes and which I'm still a part of. became attracted to anarchism because I first, when I came back to Detroit after finishing, or I shouldn't say finishing Michigan State, I graduated, never got a college degree. I became influenced by this small Trotskyist party called the Socialist Workers' Party, which later on we said, if those socialists ever get power, we'll work, they'll party. Well, they, of course, had this critique of Stalin and Stalinism and the adverse effect that it had on revolutionary movements around the world. And I'm not sure what really made me break with them, but maybe I extended their critique of power of individuals because the Russian Revolution involved millions of people. Suddenly, these middle-class bureaucrats, Trotsky and Stalin and the rest of these Bolsheviks, who they call the masses, that'd be us, disappear from the stage of history, and instead there are these bureaucrats fighting them among one another for absolute power. I knew of anarchism, of course. I had read Emma Goldman, but mostly towards the 1970s, we were reading these ultra-left communists that dispensed with the Leninist party, seeing that as inherently authoritarian and bureaucratic, and the party being the mass of people involved in revolutionary activity. And we, several of us, began a group somewhat after these post-situationists, which we called the Eat the Rich Gang, in which we carried off a number of pranks and published some broadsides and made fake copies of a Detroit newspaper and the school newspaper, things like that. And so we were going along. In fact, we were close to this group called, it was the International Communist Current, that they had pretty strong and I thought decent critiques of capitalism and what was needed for a revolution. And suddenly, and we were putting out the Fifth Estate then, and the Eat the Rich Gang essentially took over the Fifth Estate, and we began putting forth our I guess we call it left communist ideas. And suddenly, we got a letter. Dear comrades, it's good to see other anarchists about. And what? There's still anarchists. This is 1975, 1976. And it was mostly these elderly communists, elderly anarchists, some of them younger than I am now. I'm 85. I don't know if I said that earlier. I told you my birth date. And we were flabbergasted. And they would have these cena, C-E-N-A, these Italian dinners where they, as they said, we raised money for the publications and the political victims. I don't know. They all talked like The Godfather. I think it was too much tomato sauce because they were mostly part of this American-Italian anarchist movement. Wonderful men and women too. Some of who we treasured, and one who wasn't an Italian who influenced us so much, Federico Arcos, who was fought in the Spanish militias against Franco in the late 1930s when he was only 16. So when we met him, he was probably 75, 76, something like that. So all of a sudden, we felt, wait a minute, we're not just these isolated obscurantists putting out this newspaper from Detroit. There's a whole worldwide movement that we didn't know anything about, and we became part of it. Most of my practice has been publishing the Fifth Estate. I mean, of course, I go to conferences and gatherings. There hasn't been a big North American anarchist gathering in quite a while. I don't know if the last one was certainly that was a long time ago. It wasn't the late 80s or early 1990s. But I think the work of the publications, as our elderly comrades back then used to say, is very important. There used to be, of course, many print publications, and those have all pretty much gone away. So there's, I don't know what, the Fifth Estate, Slingshot, there must be more. but they're few and far between. And we have a commitment to print, although we also have digital expression. And we see ourselves as walking in the footsteps of the comrades that came before us, and hopefully there'll be people trotting after us with the same ideas, because although they began in the 19th century, they still hold great validity. I don't think communism or socialism really does. And communism in terms of anarcho-communism, maybe, but those historic large movements that were oppositional to capital just turned out to be disasters or incompetent of confronting the institution that capitalism is. I used to do interviews for a living, and I didn't tell you my occupation. I was actually a radio broadcaster, and although I was partly just a rock and roll DJ, hey, here's, that kind of stuff, I was also a talk show host, hi, you're on the air. And I did it for 46 years, which in the show I had was the longest running phone-in talk show in American radio history. I was also a talk show host on what was the longest running phone-in talk show in American radio history. It went from 1970 to 2016. And I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of guests. And I can't imagine what I would say if somebody said to me, if I asked them a question, they said, well, I don't know. So the question is, what do I think the role of anarchists is in contemporary movements or opposition to capital or trying to halt this lurch towards fascism? I don't know if we have a special role. When we're out there, maybe other people do things differently or with more impact than I do. I go to demonstrations and, say, fuck Trump, which isn't much better than the liberals around me who are desiring to get back to the golden age of Joe Biden. I always tell them, we can do a little better than that, can't we? But I don't know. I mean, it's not. I think I could give an answer that I almost suspect others have given, but I don't know. I mean, I guess just keep raising the idea that the authoritarian structures are destructive to the lives we live, both personally and socially. And because in some ways, if you think what anarchists have put forth are used across the movement, affinity groups, the idea that we don't want a top-down leadership, all those anti-authoritarian ideas in many ways mark the mass movements of today. So just keep promoting those. I mean, people don't think the Fifth Estate is really weird. I think probably, I don't know when, but, years ago, you'd say, I'm an anarchist. It'd be like saying I'm a nudist or something like that. Whereas now, particularly young people, what would young people, I'm an anarchist. And what would they say? Cool, right? I think which is probably the answer they give to lots of things. Sorry, not disparaging you. Well, anarchism has always been a totalist philosophy. We want to abolish capital. We want to abolish the state. We want to abolish the concept of value, and that's sort of Marxist, but albeit, and live a convivial life. Well, many of us do that, and when we're in small groups, people don't have any problem with that. But I think right now, people say, well, nobody goes for revolution at first resort. And so the idea that we could vote out these Republicans that are enabling Trump's fascist agenda, which is worsening each day, that's going to appeal to them. And for us to say, don't vote, it only encourages them. Don't vote, if voting could change anything, it would be illegal, those kind of classic anarchist slogans. Well, now it could. If we got a bunch of liberals in there that would stop this, but what we've been forced into is this phrase we use that we've been forced into this position of saying, please, sir, don't kill everything so fast, which means that we're still progressing towards something we don't want. How do we stop that and start creating a sense of what we do want? Well, there's no vision, for one thing. The anarchists, the Italian and the Spanish anarchists called anarchism la ideal, the ideal, the perfection of society. I mean, they prided themselves on their personal comportment and behavior. I mean, a lot of them were the older comrades, as we call them, were always shocked when they realized that we smoked marijuana. One of them said, only the fascists smoke marijuana in Europe, and this was like 70s or something like that. So I don't think our time has come. I think we need to maintain the ideas and show how they function historically, give examples, contemporary examples of what people are doing, the projects that people work on, and the fact that there are elders. I never thought I was going to be one, but it's good. It's good. I mean, being a non-elder is at my age would be bad, but and will things change? I don't know. I have no idea. People. I mean, one of the things that Marxists always do, they're always predicting the future. Like they're got a crystal ball, and they've historically been full of shit. So I don't ever venture that. I was on a commercial radio station with this phone-in talk show that was kind of, I don't know, an accident of history, of radio history, of being in Detroit, of people I knew. And there was no other show like mine in all of commercial radio in the United States, which says everything about commercial radio and nothing about me. They would never let anyone like me on the air anywhere else. Yeah, I would say I'm a anarchist, atheist, vegetarian, and go on like that. I had a theme song that incorporated a musical version of the Internationale. And it was, in fact, when I would bring up anarchism, the phones would just go quiet. I mean, because it wasn't like an NPR audience or a community station. It was these, personally I have a black t-shirt, these black t-shirted working class Detroit, mostly guys who had never heard anything like that. In fact, that was normally the response that I got. I never heard any ideas like yours, which was, I thought was terrific. I also wrote a couple books. I wrote a novel set in Detroit in 1967 called Summer on Fire, which is done pretty handily. It's set in Detroit, and the characters are all Fifth Estate characters, loosely based on me and others, but pretty loosely, and a collection of essays. So I've been busy. When people say, God, I'm so bored in retirement, I've got way too much to do. Do I think there's any hope for the future? I often hesitate to give my answer to young people because it's not what they'd like to hear. Usually everybody from the dean of the school to any revolutionary is going to say, oh, yes, the future is bright. You can make it what you want. Anything is possible. A new world is possible. I don't hold that view at all. And so I always kind of apologize to young people at first. Well, explain that, is that, well, for one thing, hope is kind of an empty emotion. It's something like you hope it doesn't rain when you're going to have a picnic or something like that. But in terms of expectation, I mean, Marxists, Marxist-Leninists, they have this almost religious sense of expectation that the proletariat will eventually overthrow capitalism and install their racket as head of a government. But we could very well have evolutionarily played ourselves out. I did listen to my friend and comrade, John Zerzan, that talked about seeing aspects of rebellion and resistance. I mean, we may have plasticized ourselves out, environmentalized ourselves out. I mean, species don't last forever, and the possibilities of anarchism with 7, 8 billion people now so totally integrated into one another that almost demand. Well, at first it demanded centralized control. Now it almost, and this sounds almost anarchistic, but not really. No one in control other than AI. So I mean, it'll wind up being like something a cross between Terminator 2 and Colossus, the Forbin project. So my apologies for young people, but I would say for being so dire. So it's nice to you, buddy. You're on the way out, but changes can be made, and things change overnight. The direst time, the darkest hours, people can turn it around. It's going to be tough because it's not just politically. In the great age of revolutions from 1848 to 1939, what needed was political change to overthrow capitalism in the state and have things run on a anarchist basis. Now we're facing structural stuff about the climate and the fact that all of us have what is it stuff called microplastics in our system and all that. So I guess I would just say to young people, give them hell. It's fun and it's what you should do.